Hello there, you're watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they come into us. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the journalist and author Rachel Shabi and the Daily Telegraph's leader writer Tim Stanley. Welcome to you both, good to see you. Well, let's have a look at what's on those front pages first off. The front cover of The Observer covers escalating tensions between Russia and the US. Its headline, Biden warns Putin you'll pay a heavy cost if you attack Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Telegraph leads with Russia plots false flag attack to provoke war. And then the Sunday Times also leading with that story. It is quoting the Defence Secretary in its headline, which reads, "This has the whiff of Munich." In other news, the front of the Express has the headline, "Coming soon, Brexit's big wins for Britain." And they are looking at Jacob Rees-Mogg's first interview as Minister for Brexit. The Mirror, meanwhile, claims that Levi Belfield's recent confession to the murders of Lynn and Meg Russell was a sick joke. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code that you'll be seeing on your screens during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's papers while you watch us. But let's go straight to our guests now, Rachel Shabi and Tim Stanley. Lovely to have you with us. And we're going to begin with that Observer front page that we were seeing there. Biden warns Putin you'll pay a heavy cost if you attack Ukraine. And of course, that's been the issue, Tim, hasn't it, thus far? What is that heavy cost? Are sanctions beefed up enough to finally make Putin listen?
We're not talking, of course, about any kind of direct military intervention by the West. As you say, we're talking about trying to make the cost of Russia going in as expensive as possible. Now, the United States and the UK are the ones sounding the loudest alarm bell over this. The US, President Biden spoke with Putin directly today, and Antony Blinken also spoke with Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. The US is warning that an invasion could come as soon as next week. How likely is that? To what extent is this about crisis diplomacy, and is it putting on a show perhaps to push up gas prices or something like that? Well, I think there are a few signs that are interesting. One is that the UK and the US have both withdrawn staff from the country. That is a classic thing that happens when a conflict's about to take place. And noticeably, Russia is reported as also starting to remove people from the ground as well. That said, I spoke to our foreign desk at the Telegraph today, and we've got one person in Moscow and we've got one person in Kiev. And both of them felt the conflict where they were sitting right now was unlikely. In Moscow, because the state media simply isn't talking about it. If Putin is planning to invade, he's not letting his own people know. And in Kiev, there is an air of almost disbelief. They are prepared psychologically for a fight, and they will fight. But they can't quite believe that this would actually happen. And the Ukrainian president is saying that the West has been stoking tensions too far. Why might the West be doing that? Final point. Well, if the US and the UK have been talking up a potential conflict a great deal, it's probably in part to frighten Putin off from doing it. That by constantly saying this is about to happen, they hope they're calling his bluff and Putin won't actually go ahead and do it. So in the next couple of days, we're probably going to hear even more heated rhetoric. But the goal, believe it or not, is not to stoke a crisis, but to actually discourage.
I wonder, Rachel, what you make of that. And actually, just as we're talking, certainly, Tim, you mentioned there the diplomatic staff being removed, certainly by the US and by the UK, if not by other European allies. Well, some breaking news for you just coming in now. Australia has now announced that it is going to be suspending all its embassy operations in Ukraine and removing the majority of its staff from Ukraine. Rachel, how important do you think that is? How significant when we talk about diplomatic staff exiting? It obviously doesn't look good. It certainly raises fears that President Biden certainly has done nothing to sort of quell, fears that President Macron has been at pains to try and quell. Where do you think we are on this sort of sliding scale of imminent invasion?
Well, I think it's worth repeating what Tim just referred to, which is the Ukrainian president getting very exasperated with this saber rattling on all sides and saying, actually, this is the worst thing you can do, is to create this panic and, withdrawing embassy staff is one of those things that provokes panic. He says it's like the worst thing that you could do. He's really disgruntled with it, clearly. And he's horrified that there are predictions even to the day of when Russia is expected to attack. I think we have to take with a grain of salt, or, a mountain of salt, all these kind of predictions about, the US saying, well, we think Russia's going to attack on Wednesday. Well, I'm sorry, but the US got completely and utterly blindsided by what happened in Afghanistan last year. So the idea that US intel now knows to the day what Russia is planning, I find hard to swallow. And it's also the case that, this kind of false flag operation that Britain is claiming, British intel is claiming, certainly from the Telegraph front page, should be treated with equal skepticism. I do think there is obviously, it's clear that diplomacy or diplomatic channels will continue. The sides have left that prospect open, and that, there needs to be a means to provide Putin with a ladder to climb down over the next few days.
Certainly, and I wonder, Tim, what you make of that this sort of question about the intelligence and the quality of the intelligence coming through. Certainly, Ben Wallace saying that Russia invading the Ukraine is highly likely, sort of towing the US line. They're sharing intelligence on that. He says it has the whiff of Munich. A sense there that some in the allied Western nations are appeasing Russia.
First of all, on the intelligence, because I think this is very interesting, America has played an unusual game in the last couple of weeks. What it's essentially done is it has handed over everything that it says is intercepted to the media. So every time there is a whiff or a rumor about the Russians doing something, the Americans have put it out there. Some journalists have actually protested against this because they say, we are not here simply to report what intelligence you claim to have without any kind of verification. Because whenever journalists say, OK, so you say there's a false flag operation planned, please tell us what your evidence for this, the US then doesn't hand it over. But it's not handing it over because, as I say, it is almost indiscriminately just revealing everything it claims that it has. The goal of that sounds a bit balmy, but the goal is a rational one, which is to let us know in advance everything Putin might do so that Putin will be spooked out of doing that one thing. Secondly, on the question of appeasement, Ben Wallace has used this very emotive term, that it's a Munich moment. The implication being that if we don't take a stand in Ukraine, if the West isn't united and allied around Ukraine, then there's a risk that Putin, like Hitler, could then try his luck on Poland. He could go further into Western Europe. Well, I think that's a stretch as a metaphor. I don't think that's quite what Putin's ambitions are. But in essence, he's correct in that if the West doesn't take a stand at Ukraine, which is on the border of NATO, then the next country, if Putin is interested in ethnic nationalism and re-establishing the authority of the Soviet Union, the next countries he'll have his eyes on will be NATO members. So what the UK and the US are saying here is, we don't want conflict. We're not going to put soldiers into Ukraine. This is not going to lead to a global conflict of any sorts. All we're saying is we have to say no to Putin somewhere, and we want to try to discourage it here so that he won't try it elsewhere.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, trying to work out where that no comes from is the sort of million-dollar question at the moment. There's one article that is on the front of The Observer. This is London Mayor issues threat to veto appointment of the Met chief. Rachel, this one about Sadiq Khan potentially involved now in a standoff with the Home Secretary.
Yeah, that's right. Potential showdown over the appointment of the new Met chief. It's to do with Sadiq Khan basically saying, look, whoever is appointed needs to get that there has to be a culture change at the Met, following all these revelations of, police officers bragging about violence towards women and sending racist and homophobic messages, and a really toxic culture at the Met, which Sadiq Khan writes in The Observer, reminds him of the bad old days in the 70s and 80s when it was just, perceived as misogynistic, sexist, homophobic, racist. So he's determined that the new chief will have a plan and be of a mindset to take on this culture, and has said that he's, prepared to use his veto if the person put forward does not meet that criteria.
Absolutely. Tim, what do you make of the way that this has all been handled, Cressida Dick's resignation, and how they're going to try and find the new Met Commissioner?
The implication of Khan's intervention is that Priti Patel might be more interested in finding someone who is anti-woke and tough on crime than interested in tackling the culture within the police force. Although these two things are not necessarily in contradiction. People who are concerned about the police force being distracted by woke causes are also appalled at the things that were reported to have been said and done at Charing Cross Police Station. Equally, people who are concerned to maintain good community relations and to root out bigotry in the Met also want to see things like burglaries being investigated and punished. So I don't think there necessarily needs to be a tension here, but there's obviously there is space for a political row here, and we'll have to see how it plays out in the next few days.
Absolutely. Well, let's have a look at the Telegraph now. The front page that we were talking about earlier. Families denied holidays amid 1 million COVID app blunders. This about 1 million vaccine records being affected in these NHS blunders. And Rachel, it means, the implications for people, particularly trying to go on holidays, are quite serious, aren't they?
Yes, so the Telegraph is reporting that that million figure that you just mentioned could be the tip of the iceberg. And this is readers getting in touch with them to alert them to this, that the NHS app appears to have blundered by either disappearing people's vaccine passports or getting the information wrong, as far as I can make out. So then people had this awful back and forth trying to get the app to show their vaccine passport, without which, of course, they couldn't travel when you look at the summer last year. So, just a really stressful situation. Travel last year was, as we know, already pretty stressful with having all this documentation, quite expensive with all the tests that you needed. And so to add this to the top, on top of it, and, presumably prevented some people from going on holiday, obviously a very stressful and upsetting situation.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know exactly how difficult it was to travel last year. Tim, the Sunday Express on its front page has an exclusive with Jacob Rees-Mogg. Coming soon, Brexit's big wins for Britain. It is a first interview with the new Minister for Brexit. What do we learn?
Well, I don't know, because I haven't seen the inside of the paper. But what I can say with regards to Jacob... So it's rather embarrassing, because it says lots of opportunities for Brexit, see page 4. And then, unfortunately, I can't get to page 4. We'll have to find out what they are. But for Jacob personally, the cabinet reshuffle has been a question of onwards and sideways. He didn't get quite promoted. He got moved from Leader of the House to being in charge of Brexit opportunities. That's thought partly to be a recognition of his loyalty in defending the Prime Minister in the last few days, but also a recognition that he may have put a foot wrong when it came to the Owen Paterson affair. So now he's in charge with realising Brexit opportunities. Well, that's potentially going to put him in conflict with the Treasury, which is not only reluctant to spend money, but also there are a couple of big Brexit opportunities which Brexiteers in the Tory party say the government is not exploring, such as cutting VAT on fuel. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out inside the Tory party.
All right, and Rachel, what do you make of Jacob Rees-Mogg as the new Brexit minister?
I mean, can I just say that I think Brexit opportunities revealed on a page that we cannot see is the perfect metaphor. It just do not exist.
Do you know what? I think that's the perfect place to leave it there with a wonderful metaphor. See page 4 of the Express. You have been asked. Thank you very much to both Tim Stanley and Rachel Shabi there, my guests for the press preview.